Why World War II was unavoidable after 1919. By 1939, Europe did not drift into war by accident. It arrived there because, over 2 decades, the international system steadily lost every practical method of limiting escalation without accepting risks that political leaders were unwilling to take. This documentary examines the structural conditions and policy failures between 1919 and 1939 that made large-scale war in Europe increasingly difficult to prevent. The term unavoidable does not mean predetermined or inevitable. It refers to a situation in which no major power possessed both the capability and the political incentive to halt escalation without risking immediate and potentially uncontrollable conflict. When the First World War ended, fighting stopped, but the central problem of European security remained unresolved. Empires collapsed, new states emerged, and borders were redrawn across Central and Eastern Europe. Political authority weakened, and the traditional balance of power that had governed Europe before 1914 no longer existed. The war reshaped the continent, but did not produce a stable replacement for the system it destroyed. At the Paris Peace Conference, the victorious powers did not share a single strategic vision for the future of Europe. France prioritized long-term security and sought to permanently weaken Germany to prevent another invasion. British policymakers focused on restoring a balance of power while protecting global trade routes and imperial interests. The United States promoted national self-determination and a new international order based on collective security and legal norms. These objectives pointed in different directions. The resulting settlement reflected compromise rather than coherence. It ended the war without creating a system capable of managing future crises or enforcing stability over time. Germany lost significant territory in all overseas colonies. Its borders were revised in ways that left millions of ethnic Germans outside the new state. The Rhineland was demilitarized and placed under Allied supervision. The German army was restricted in size and denied access to modern weapons. Responsibility for war damages was formally assigned, and reparations were imposed at a level that required long-term external financing. The treaty weakened Germany militarily, but left its industrial capacity largely intact. It reduced Germany's ability to fight immediately, but not its ability to recover economically over time. France received formal security guarantees but lacked the independent power to enforce them. Germany was excluded from the international system, creating resentment without eliminating its long-term potential. The settlement produced dissatisfaction on multiple sides. It solved the immediate problem of ending the war, but not the long-term problem of maintaining peace. The League of Nations was designed to preserve peace through collective security. In theory, aggression against one member would trigger a collective response. In practice, the system lacked the tools required to make this principle credible. The League had no independent military force. Its decisions depended on consensus among member states. The United States never joined, removing the strongest potential guarantor of the system. The Soviet Union remained outside the League for most of the interwar period. Germany joined late and withdrew once revisionist policies became central to its leadership. Without universal participation, collective security remained incomplete. When crises emerged, enforcement repeatedly failed. The League did not prevent Japan's expansion in East Asia. Sanctions against Italy during the Ethiopian War were limited and ineffective. Disarmament agreements existed without reliable verification or enforcement. Collective security remained a principle without operational power. Economic instability further weakened the post-war order. The international financial system that emerged after 1919 was fragile and highly interconnected. Political stability depended on economic recovery that proved uneven and temporary. Germany's reparations relied heavily on foreign loans. International financial arrangements reduced short-term pressure but did not resolve structural dependency. When global credit collapsed after 1929, European economies destabilized rapidly. Industrial production declined across much of the continent. Unemployment reached unprecedented levels. Governments struggled to respond within existing political frameworks. Economic policy became reactive, focused on crisis management rather than long-term stability. Economic crisis did not cause war directly. It undermined democratic institutions and weakened political forces committed to restraint. It reduced public support for compromise and increased tolerance for radical solutions. Across Europe, extremist movements gained influence by promising recovery, order, and national restoration. In Germany, electoral shifts and elite miscalculations opened the path to authoritarian rule. Political decisions increasingly favored short-term stabilization over long-term restraint. By the early 1930s, the Versailles system was openly challenged. Legal obligations lost political authority as enforcement weakened. Germany halted reparations payments. International disarmament efforts failed to reach agreement. Withdrawal from diplomatic frameworks signaled a shift away from negotiated revision. Rearmament followed. Treaty limitations were violated incrementally. Each violation tested whether enforcement would follow. When German forces re-entered the Rhineland, no military response occurred. Each unopposed action altered expectations. Treaty enforcement appeared optional. Security guarantees lost credibility. Risk-taking became increasingly rational within the existing system. By the mid-1930s, the post-war order no longer constrained revisionist states. The mechanisms designed to manage change had ceased to function. British and French policy during this period reflected strategic limitation rather than indifference. Both states faced military unpreparedness after years of reduced defense spending. Public opinion strongly opposed another major war. Global and imperial commitments stretched available resources. Appeasement emerged as a policy of delay. It aimed to manage revision through negotiation while rearmament progressed. Some grievances were viewed as legitimate within the framework of national self-determination. The expectation was that revision could be contained within limits. The strategy assumed that expansion would stop once specific demands were met. Each concession was justified as preventing immediate conflict while buying time. Rearmament continued, but not fast enough to restore deterrence. This calculation depended on assumptions that proved unreliable. The occupation of the remainder of Czechoslovakia in 1939 marked a decisive shift. Negotiated revision gave way to open domination. Confidence in further accommodation collapsed. Britain and France issued guarantees to Poland, transforming future disputes into alliance obligations. Local conflicts now carried the risk of general war. At the same time, Germany secured its eastern flank through a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. Diplomatic flexibility narrowed rapidly. Once commitments hardened, options diminished. When demands were rejected, escalation followed. Existing institutions lacked mechanisms to reverse events without military action. Once mobilization began, political control weakened. By the late 1930s, no single power was capable of stabilizing Europe. The United States remained outside European security commitments. Britain lacked the resources to enforce order on the continent while defending its empire. France depended on alliances it could not independently support. The Soviet Union remained politically isolated until the final years before the war. Incentives were misaligned. Democratic governments faced strong domestic pressure to avoid conflict. Authoritarian regimes faced pressure to deliver rapid nationalist gains. Delay consistently favored revisionist powers. In this environment, preventive action appeared more dangerous than delay. The international system created after 1919 contained unresolved contradictions. Economic crisis intensified political instability. Security guarantees lacked enforcement. Appeasement reflected strategic constraint rather than moral failure. By the late 1930s, policy options narrowed to two outcomes: acceptance of continued expansion or open conflict. When those options collapsed into one, war followed. If this explanation helped clarify how the war began, you may find value in the next episodes of this series. Each one examines a specific decision, failure, or assumption that shaped the course of the Second World War. You can subscribe to continue from this point forward.